Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 on this, the last day of August. And tonight, my guest is writer and academic, Effie Samara. Welcome back to the programme, Effie. It's been a little while since I've seen you.
Hi, Gordon.
Okay. Now, Effie, I'm just going to get tore into the coronavirus update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 565,285 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK government's regional testing centres. Of these, 544,807 were confirmed negative, whilst 20,478 were positive. There are now 160 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, but there are 0 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. Now, of course, this will be an underestimate of the numbers of cases because not everyone with the virus displays symptoms and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 258 were in hospital last night, 5 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection remains at 2,494. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,501 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 2 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now let me just remind you that if you wish to take part in the programme, you can do so by going online and following us on Twitter, using the @BroadcastScot and hashtag Scotland at 7 to join in the conversation. And now to our first story this evening. The SNP say the Scottish Tories are clueless on jobs and the economy. The SNP has warned that the Scottish Tories are clueless on jobs and the economy after it was revealed that their suggested Scottish procurement policy is at odds with their own party's so-called UK internal market plans. The Scotland First procurement policy set out today by Douglas Ross is entirely incompatible with Westminster's controversial internal market plans, which state a requirement not to discriminate between individuals or businesses based on residence or origin in the UK. The new Scottish Tory leader was also repeatedly unable to provide details on how much his proposals would cost in an interview with BBC Scotland, and offers no costs for any of his proposals in the document. Now, I should also say to you that during his interview, he was also called out by one of the leaders of a National Farmers Union, who claimed that Mr. Ross had misquoted him as saying that he supported the Conservatives' position on the imports and exports of food and the standards involved. And it was apparently quite a car crash interview. Anyway, let me come to you, Effie, for your reaction to this. I dare say you've probably already heard about this new internal market bill, but I definitely don't think many people have heard of Mr. Ross's proposals for Scotland First. Is this a new thing to you as well? Were you surprised by this?
Well, linguistically, it's interesting that he's using Scotland first. It sort of rings a little bit like Britain first. And I don't know, there's something quite strange about it. But obviously, if he's actually willing to put Scotland first, then brilliant. However, I'm afraid that his track record does not quite match the promise. I believe that he voted against Section 11 only a couple of weeks ago, which could have enabled Parliament to vote against any deal that would lower standards in agriculture, which would have included protective standards, agriculture, livestock in Scotland, whiskey, all across the agricultural sector and the farming sector. So he has already acted in contradiction to the promise. Now, obviously, it remains to be seen, and one can be hopeful that he does materialize. But, you can only be judged by your actions. So I wouldn't be too optimistic. He tends to be semantically very free, with his expressions. We know that he's quick to respond, but he can be a bit thoughtless. So sometimes he is a little bit like his own worst enemy, Gordon, I think. So in that regard, obviously, as you said, the proposals have not been costed.
Yeah. I think we
he's proposing in terms of consolidated stuff.
So basically what you're saying is Mr. Ross here is, shall we say, manipulating the semantics of this, the words that he's using, where he's saying that, or he's claiming that Mr. Hall, Johnny Hall, said that no MP voted to reduce animal welfare or biosecurity standards, when in actual fact what happened was that Mr. Ross failed to vote to protect those standards. Would I be correct in saying that?
Well, absolutely. And the instituting the idea of the internal market by the post-Brexit Britannia, will be something to behold, I think, given that the internal market that the UK was part of the European Union was the best deal, giving countries access to over 700 deals across the globe on the best possible terms. And they have rejected that. Now, I believe it was Mike Russell a couple of weeks ago with Kenny, who broke down the whole idea of the internal market and what it proposes to do. And I think, from judging by what he said in the papers that I've written, that I've read, it's a little bit to do with more, if you like, erasing the devolution settlement rather than an actual market and promoting the economy.
Yeah, my understanding, Effie, of the internal market, the internal market law or whatever it is they're planning to create, would allow the British government to veto any legislation that the Scottish government happens to come up with if they judge that it adversely affects some other region of the United Kingdom. Would that be a fair assessment of how this works?
I think that is it, Gordon. So in fact, what happens is constitutionally, Scotland, following on from the Act of Union onwards, and after the findings of the Seward Commission and various other constitutional documents, Scotland it is within Scotland's, if you like, ability to counteract or vote down an Act of Parliament that is not in the best interest of Scotland. So it is within the competency of Holyrood to do so. This bill intends to beat that competency and erase it. So in that regard, it's more of an attack on devolution. Is about economics.
I see. Effie, it's been said by a number of constitutional experts and pundits generally online that because Scottish and English laws are broadly have to be considered to be equal to each other, not one superior over to the other, surely this is a case of Scotland's jurisdiction holds here, because anything that the Scottish Parliament decides to do within its own boundaries, if you like, it surely can't be gainsaid by the UK government afterwards.
Well, this is very interesting, and if anyone is preoccupied by these issues, and they are very important, big issues, I would highly recommend Joanna Cherry's latest sort of, if you like, communications with the ministries in London. She has written repeatedly to her English counterparts and the head of the civil service in regards to the proposed overhaul, if you like, of the civil service, and the idea that administrative law is now to be, according to the latest news coming out of the office of Dominic Cummings, it is to be overhauled. Now, this is very, very interesting because obviously it's a large discussion, but as we all know, the English constitution is not a written constitution. So there are no rigid safeguards as to what happens if Parliament or the executive seek to breach or violate it, very much as it happened just before Christmas with the prorogation of Parliament. So there is no constitutional safeguard on that. The immediate reaction of Parliament, if you like, or the power of the judiciary would be to come in and adjudicate on these matters as they did before Christmas. Now, the proposed overhaul of administrative law effectively means that they are trying to take away from the courts justiciability of the legality of of an executive act.
I understand, yeah.
In plain talk is, if the executive gets a little bit too brave and violate certain aspects of the constitution, there is pretty much nothing to be done. Now, in Scotland, according to the claim of right, the Scottish courts have precedence over these matters. They are now proposing to overhaul the Scottish system as well.
That was my understanding, and this is what Joanna Cherry felt was a legal step too far, that they were overstepping their jurisdiction by crossing the border with this new attempt to alter the system, that the justice system of Scotland, so that we could not stop anything that Mr. Johnson decided to do. Would that be a reasonable assessment?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Well, listen, I'd like, if you're ready, to move on to our second story this evening. And that is that more support for perinatal and infant mental health is to be provided. Charities providing counselling and peer and parental support are to share funding to help improve the life chances and well-being of pregnant women, new mums and their families. The Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Fund will provide annual funding of up to £1 million to help third sector organisations to deliver vital services. Mental Health Minister Claire Hawkey attended a virtual meeting with AMA Birth Companions to announce the successful organisations to receive a share of the funding. The charity supports vulnerable women who would otherwise experience birth without a partner, including a number of women who are refugees, asylum seekers or are living in poverty. Ms Hawkey said, "We want all mothers and their families to have access to good mental health care throughout pregnancy and during the postnatal period. The third sector provides an invaluable source of support, and with the impacts of COVID-19, their work is far more important now than ever. The fund will allow one-to-one support for organisations to help provide the care that women and their families need across Scotland. Our delivery plan will help us to continue to improve perinatal and infant mental health services, backed by another £50 million and guided by the voices of women with lived experience." Now, Sam, sorry, Effie, I was going to call you Sam there. Effie, I was just going to say the thing that stands out for me is that last sentence, guided by the voices of women with lived experience. That, I think, tells us a lot about how the Scottish Government approaches this, surely.
Well, this is a very large discussion, in fact, a huge discussion within academia and the medical profession. And just to give it a very brief context, over the last perhaps 10 years, there's been a shift in methodological approaches, if you like, to practices such as medicine or social science. And my own doctoral supervisor, Professor Phipps, who's been on Broadcasting Scotland many, many times, is a pioneer in shifting the paradigm, if you like, from a very theoretical approach, one would say a patriarchal approach, one would say even probably a colonized approach to all of these matters. So, as we said previously, for example, medicine, especially medicine in childbirth, is a huge issue. I'm sure our listeners and viewers and yourself would have heard there's been a bit of talk about that heart disease in women is missed by medical professionals a lot. Now, the reason for that is very much alluded to there about the mental health services, is that when women go in, our narratives and our way of defining ourselves is so different to what is the traditional medical rigid narrative that doctors actually fail to notice the big signs of heart disease. Now, in terms of childbirth and labor, obviously I've had a baby, and I know very well what this is all about. I was very fortunate in that my doctor was a woman who had had 4 children of her own, so big luck there.
Okay.
But yeah, not everyone gets this. And the problem is, especially when it comes to depression and hormonal imbalances, which is something that can be very present, we have had women even commit suicide as a result of childbirth. Now, for this to be addressed and for women's voices to be given priority is a huge big step towards decolonizing that discourse, if you
Indeed.
like.
So the word you use is colonizing. I think that's interesting because I can remember many years ago when my second child was born, my son, that it was a women-led surgery. The entire, it was an elective section. He was very late, and it was women. That everybody in the entire theatre was female, and it was led by a female surgeon. And I remember my wife saying to me, "Thank God for that." You know, she was so grateful that it wasn't being led by men, and that the women were there, would understand what she was going through, and would take good care of her. And in fact, they really did. And her second birth experience was very different from the first. So I'm thinking here, you know, that sentence that I picked up on the end, at the end of the item, that this mental health service is going to be guided by the voices of women, is a huge change, is it not, from the top down now to the women themselves saying how they want these services to be delivered and what they need. Surely a much better way of providing for them.
Well, this isn't new, Gordon. You know, the history is written by the victor.
Indeed.
So, you know, when it comes to things like child, for example, let us not forget that up until very recently, the child born was the property of the father. So there as well, regardless of whose body, if you like, was responsible for creating that life and bringing it into the world, most women actually, to the peril of their own lives, this was completely disregarded. I would also anecdotally refer viewers to Victorian discourses on childbirth. I mean, I've got a smile on my face, but I can tell you, because I have studied this matter extensively, Victorian childbirth were the leading medical authority up until quite recently. Now, if you are brave enough tonight to Google it and literally just open one of the pages and see what Victorian doctors thought of women in childbirth, I very much doubt that you'll be able to have a good night's sleep. Changing,
I believe you. I believe you, Effie.
Changing the narrative is huge. And let me just bring in the last item also that you said about the refugee women and members of the asylum seeker community. Now, again, that was a very, very colonized area where very much the host country would decide what was best for the new arrival, regardless if that person had been subjected to torture or trauma or rape. So none of their stories would ever be heard. It's a huge step for me, and regardless of party affiliation, I think it really ought to be welcomed.
Okay, if you listen, well, thank you for your comments on that. I think that's it's clarified a lot of things for me as well, reading this story tonight. Anyway, on to our next story. Social care among several roles that must be on the shortage occupation list. Now, 1 in 10 social care workers in Scotland are migrants and are making a vital contribution. The new immigration system proposed by the UK government would leave Scotland's vital social care sector critically short of staff, according to a new report. It would also damage the number of other important sectors in Scotland. The Scottish Government's response to the Migration Advisory Committee's call for evidence in the UK Shortage Occupation List, or the SOL, highlights the fact that social work and residential care sectors are heavily reliant on migrants, with almost 10% of the roles filled by workers from outside the UK, the majority of whom would not qualify for a visa under the so-called skilled worker route, currently being proposed by the UK government. Ben Macpherson, the Minister for Public Finance and Migration, said the remarkable contribution of non-UK citizens working in health and social care and other sectors has been brought into especially sharp focus during the ongoing coronavirus COVID-19 crisis. He also said that social care roles must now be added to the SOL in order to prevent a labour shortage in this crucial sector. The response shows that 29,300 non-UK nationals work in the health and social care sector. Now, Effie, this has, I think, in many people's minds, this doesn't surprise anyone, because anyone who has a relative in social care will know that many of the social carers are from outside of Scotland.
I very recently had a personal experience with the care sector. As I've mentioned before, I lost my mum in January, and for a very short period between, yes, it was. There's never a good time to lose your mum, but there you have it. So between September, for a very short time, between September and December, we had my mum was at home, so she was never transferred to a care home or anything.
Yeah.
But we just had to have some help through those proved to be the last few months of her life.
Yeah.
And I've got to say that our personal experience was that it was just 4 Scottish lasses, so we didn't have anyone from overseas. It just so happened. But the conversations that I had with them were incredibly enlightening in showing me the enormous, not just care, but also expertise that is needed for this profession. For the UK government to simply say, right, we're going to do away with a few of these people, is quite criminal. You forgive the emotive expression, but as I said, given my recent experience, it's probably one of the most important, especially after our latest experiences with COVID. Care is what it is,
Yeah. Well, listen, Effie, thank you for that. I think you've made your support for these workers very clear. And Chris, it's nice to have you on board. We weren't sure whether you'd be able to join us tonight. I'm not sure if you just heard the last item that we were talking about the fact that social care workers from outside of the UK really need to have their status protected. What's your view of that, Chris, as a union man?
Well, it's nice to join you. Thanks very much. That's down to my own personal blunder. So the social care in itself, as you know, Gordon, I've been calling for a radical rethink of how we do social care in Scotland.
Yeah.
But the wider issue, which could possibly help Scotland if we were in the EU, is actually to have that holistic discussion with other members of the EU as to their approach to social care, which could possibly help to shape the social care not only in Scotland but around the rest of Europe. And that's one of the benefits that you would get from being a member of the
Because,
EU, being
yeah, I was
able
going
to
to.
be in the discussion at the outset.
Yeah, Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. The main thrust of this story this evening is about the fact that there are critical shortages in the care sector, and the Scottish Government, Scottish politicians are worried that because of the UK's approach to immigration, where you have to have, what is it, over £30,000 a year or something like that, that most social care workers won't get anywhere near that sort of salary, and under the current circumstances would be removed from the workforce, leaving this huge gaping hole in the care sector.
Well, there's two issues that spring to mind here. Is obviously the Scottish living wage,
Yeah.
which is actually higher than the national living wage, which is set by Westminster. You know, we've all seen, if you look on the trains, you know, there's a wee badge there that says, you know, that ScotRail is a real living wage provider. So if you were to adapt that living wage, which we personally believe should be round about the £10 mark, and then you add that to 37.5 hours per week, multiply that by the 12, you know, then that would possibly take you not. It would take you near to the 30,000, but not just quite.
Yeah.
But you know, as I say, if we were autonomous of Westminster, and you know, we were actually working directly with the EU in order to be able to raise these hourly rates, you know, it wouldn't actually be a necessarily qualifying item for discussion within the EU, but at the end of the day, we could still pay care workers, you know, a better than average living wage.
Okay, listen, thank you, Chris. We're ready to end that item there and move on. Our next story this evening is to do with PFI contracts. Now, the PFI hangover is costing Scotland over £5 billion. New figures included in the GERS report reveal that the public sector has been forced to shell out billions of pounds of overpriced PFI projects, thanks to Labour's mismanagement of public spending over a decade ago. Well, the actual capital cost of Labour's privately financed projects amounted to around £4 billion. Total repayments are now estimated at an eye-watering £22.5 billion, and that's 5.6 times higher than the initial value of the contracts. According to the latest figures, costs footed by the taxpayer have amounted to more than £5 billion in the last 5 years alone. In the last financial year alone, health boards and local authorities across Scotland directly lost £934 million repaying the debts of the former Labour administration. Commenting, the SNP MSP Gordon MacDonald said, Labour's toxic PFI legacy is draining money from our NHS in its time of need, right into the private bank accounts of these business fat cats. £5 billion could have been spent on nurses, doctors and local hospital services, but the bills won't stop anytime soon, and they will keep rising every year. Labour should be ashamed of themselves. If Richard Leonard had any respectability, he'd stand up and apologise for this shambles on behalf of his party. Labour cannot be trusted with our public finances ever again. Effie, here is another story of, I think a hangover is probably a relatively an understatement. This is a massive amount of debt which has been incurred through these public finance initiative plans, where the public sector has supposedly taken on the risk of building these large public buildings and then leasing them back to the local authorities or the health authorities for what seems like a king's ransom.
Well, absolutely, and there have been a lot of studies about the actual cost, because I understand that the actual capital which was initially accounted for, is nowhere near the figures which will be accounted for, if you like, at the end of these contracts, some of which are taking us to the late 2030s. I've got a contract here in front of me with just an example, North Asia Council. This contract, it says here, the debt on it will not be repaid until 2038. So that gives you almost the scale of, because we're talking interest payments here, and we're also talking obviously about all the running costs and everything else that is taken into account. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this, Gordon, is that there still is not clarity on the procedural issues surrounding these contracts. For example, the procurement of some of them, also the legality of the corporate law. Some of them are known to be shell companies within other shell companies.
Yes.
And I understand there are police investigations ongoing at the moment, trying to, ask questions on these matters. So you're talking, this just tells you, other than obviously the ongoing burden on ourselves as Scottish taxpayers, but also if a government goes down this path of favouring certain people, illegality or obscure legality, the consequences are not to be felt for years and years and decades. It's a shady area and one that deserves a lot of attention.
Okay, well, listen, thank you, Effie. Coming to you, Chris, on this subject, and I know you'll probably have plenty to say on this, but my impression is that the Labour Party, when it was in power under Mr Blair and latterly with Gordon Brown, expanded what was initially a conservative idea, wasn't it? The idea of using the public sector to provide the money to build a building, which they then owned and leased back to the public sector. But it seems that whoever wrote the contracts or whoever agreed the contracts from the Labour administration had no idea how much money was going to be paid back. And we've been stiffed with the bill, it seems.
Yeah, we certainly have been stiff with the bill. And I'm ever so grateful for Effie to point out the fact that, they are shell companies within shell companies. And it could be likened to those wee wooden Russian dolls. That every one that you open, there's another one there, and another one there, and another one there, and the money then cascades all the way down. So all their friends and hedge fund managers, they all get a bit of a tickle. And at this point in time, during COVID, where the Scottish Government have had to put money up to mitigate the parking charges that are still retained within the PFI built hospitals in Scotland.
Indeed.
We could have directed that money into direct medical care. Maybe taking on another couple of hundred staff and all the rest of it. So, Labour have got an absolute pig in the poke to deal with. They will not apologise for it in any such way, shape, or form, because they view these PFI contracts as the dirty family secret that was unearthed in the 90s.
Chris, I was just going to say, Chris, I'm sorry to stop you in your tracks there. Effie and yourself seem to be in agreement that the money that was paid to these, I'm assuming they're kind of cartels of business people who would put up the millions of pounds necessary to build the buildings, and then, as you say, funnel the money through shell accounts and fake companies. Where is it ending up? I mean, well, not fake companies, but certainly legal companies, shall we say. But finding that money is going to be impossible now, surely, seeing where it went.
Well, trying to trace the money is one thing, Gordon. But I have to agree with you when you say, where does this money end up? Because you need to be someone, like Carol Vorderman, in order to work out exactly who is going to
And there's
benefit from it.
what I was going to say, Chris, is that although there's nothing illegal being alleged here, the fact is that the money has disappeared, and we don't even know whether the people who originally invested are actually paying any profits on the money that they've taken.
Yeah, well, as basically, if you remember back in the 70s, there was a thing called the pyramid scheme.
Yes.
I think it was used quite sensationally by an American company called Amway.
That's right.
And basically, you
Cleaning
had
products.
you had to recruit X amount, and then you got a kickback from whatever amount that you recruited and stuff like
That's
that.
right.
So the money is funneling down that way. It's certainly not going to the working classes, that's for sure, Gordon.
Well, Chris, just to correct the impression that you're giving there, this wasn't a pyramid scheme, but I understand you're drawing a parallel with it, but it wasn't a pyramid scheme.
I'm just drawing a parallel there. Yeah.
However, they have obviously been profiteering. Obviously, I think that's the nicest thing you could say about it. Anyway, I would like to move on.
Let's just finish it off by saying it's not socialist ideals; it's corporate driven.
Well, I think that much is fairly obvious, Chris, but thank you for saying it anyway.
At the end of the day, capitalism.
Okay, well, listen, we do need to move on, and this time we're talking about a far-right plan to protest against asylum seekers in Dover. Concern is mounting over a day of protest by far-right groups in Dover, the latest in a number of direct actions against asylum seekers who have recently arrived in the UK in small boats. Far-right organisers for various groups have said on social media that they plan to take over Dover by force by blocking roads and ferries. Anti-migrant groups have mobilised around the issue of asylum seekers arriving in small boats. Despite claims that the UK is being overwhelmed by the number of arrivals, the latest Home Office asylum statistics released on Thursday show that the last 3 months, the number of asylum applications had halved from 8,455 in January to March to just 4,850 in April to June. Inspector Jodie Gagan-Cook of the Kent Police said the Kent Police are aware of a possible protest in Dover and are working with partners, including local authority, to minimise any potential disruption. Individuals are understood to be monitoring the Kent coastline and posting footage on social media. 2 weeks ago, an asylum seeker was assaulted by someone watching him and others arrive at a beach near the village of Kingsdown in Kent. A witness who was swimming in the sea at the time reported that the man who attacked the asylum seeker was really yelling at the people who arrived on the beach. And he was saying, "F off, back to your own country," and other profanities, I guess. And another man was actually filming the whole thing. There was a woman who was using incredibly racist language and kept saying that there was no space for asylum seekers in the UK. The witness then said that a group of about 16 asylum seekers who had arrived on the beach were cornered by what she described as the self-appointed Border Watch Group, and many ran away terrified. Chris, I think I'll come to you first of all with this one. I know that you have a very keen interest in the problems of asylum seekers, migrants, however you want to characterise them. But also, Effie, I'll come back to you on this as well. But Chris, what's your impression of this seeming vigilantism, it appears, in Dover?
Well, it's deeply worrying, of course, but what is more concerning to me is obviously what's happening in Greece at this moment in time. This is the bigger picture. And what England seem to be doing is that they are just gaslighting the situation and making a mountain out of a molehill. Now, you quite correctly reported the fact that migration, recently has actually halved.
Yeah, asylum applications have halved.
Yeah. So the system that Britain is, currently adopting is obviously working for the way that the Tory party want want it to
Yeah,
work.
it does certainly seem to be doing so.
The actual number of illegal migrants who are daring to cross the channel is actually very small compared to the actions of the Greek government at this moment in time. Now, they've actually decided to start to disperse many of the camps within mainland Greece because, quite simply, they have not had the amount of support that they would have liked to have got from other countries and obviously the EU.
I understand, yeah.
This is then forcing migrants to move from one country to another.
Yep.
Because no one is willing to take the responsibility of the fact that they are escaping war-torn countries. They're escaping basically, you know, what could possibly be described as a shortage of utilities and food due to the fact that other countries are bombing the Donald Duck out of their countries.
Got you. Okay.
And the lack of empathy within the EU, coupled with the dog whistling right-wing media of Britain, is basically not allowing these people to settle in any one such place.
I understand, Chris.
And what it is going to do is the fact that they are creating a narrative of a kind of like dad's army,
right?
Who are going to go down and patrol the beaches of Dover and Folkestone and all the rest of it. It is just nasty right-wing fascism, which Scotland doesn't want to be a part of.
Thank you, Chris. Effie, I'm sorry, I wanted to come back to you on this as well. Chris is characterising this as, first of all, the British government is gaslighting this, trying to build it up into something it's not. And we're seeing vigilante groups forming now. And according to this report this evening, actual assaults taking place on the beach. Who is responsible, do you think, Effie, for stirring people up like this? Is it our own British government, or is it the media at large across Europe?
Here, it's 100% the British government. You only have to see the tweets coming out of the Home Office on Friday, I believe it was, where members of the legal profession, barristers and solicitors, were labelled as activist lawyers. I believe that we have all seen these tweets. The tweet was subsequently removed after a formal complaint by the Law Society hit the Home Office. Now, this demonstrates to you what we are faced with. This is a Home Office. They used to be very competent. They used to be very good at knowing what to put out there, if anything at all. At the moment, they have completely disintegrated and simply dancing to the tune of one Priti Patel, who is led by the different interests that she represents. And we have a man called Nigel Farage on the beaches, patrolling Dover, making sure that, 3.5 people don't find themselves on a dinghy, dispatching people in hotels, which are housing people who may be vulnerable, who may be raped, traumatized, disabled, and they are haunting them and forcing them to give interviews. And the television, the official broadcaster of the United Kingdom, is open to these reports. In fact, they broadcast them, and they also invite people like Farage and others to promote this narrative. It's no longer a narrative. Now, what happens once a narrative is allowed into the mainstream, it becomes reality. It becomes law. So you have people like Priti Patel, who has some natural, inexplicable disgust towards people who are not purely racially English, and you would think this wouldn't be happening because she herself is not one of the purely ethnically English people.
Okay.
So she puts out these tweets and other prompts, and the result obviously is that you will get vigilante action actually happening at Dover and other locations.
Okay, listen, Effie, I'm sorry, we'll have to end that item there. We're moving on now to another racism-linked story. An investigation has been ordered into a right-wing magazine portraying a black politician as a slave. The Paris prosecutor's office said on Monday that it was opening an investigation into an alleged racist insult after a French far-right magazine, a French right-wing magazine, published an article with an illustration portraying a black member of parliament as a slave. The article in the magazine, Valeurs Actuelles, titled Obono the African, gives a fictional account of politician Danielle Obono returning to the 18th century Africa. And she is pictured with an iron collar around her neck. Obono, who was born in Gabon, represents a district of North Paris in Parliament. The piece prompted outrage across the French political spectrum, including the Prime Minister, Jean Castex, who called it revolting. Let me first come to you, Chris. Now,
all under one banner, the non-party campaign organ.
I beg your pardon, Chris. We're going to have to keep your comments brief, I'm afraid, on this one. Another piece of racist. I don't know what you would call this. It's a magazine article portraying a current politician as a slave. What can we say about this?
Well, the only thing that I can say, Gordon, and I will keep it brief. I am absolutely disgusted at this. This is horrendous, obviously, but it just shows you the rise of the far right within Europe, which is being fueled by this white supremacy, which is is carrying fever pitch from America to Europe, into Britain. It's ever present in Australia as well.
Okay.
And it cannot be condemned in the strongest possible terms. It is absolutely shocking that we've got to deal with this in 20th century, in this day and age.
Okay, Chris, thank you for that. Effie, what's your reaction to this story?
This is, I will just echo Chris, this is a wave. What's interesting about this, what's shockingly interesting about this is that we thought it wasn't coming back after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
If my grandfather were alive today, it would probably kill him just watching this, because these people at the time, this is precisely what they died for and what they fought against.
Yeah.
And my dad was a very, very small child at the time, and he will tell you the same thing. It's coming back. It's very dangerous. It's funded by a lot of money, and we must be very aware of it.
Thank you. If those sort of warning words there, I think will resonate with many people watching this evening. And now to the Baltic states, who have hit Lukashenko and the Belarus officials with sanctions. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have imposed travel bans on President Alexander Lukashenko and 29 other Belarusian officials on Monday, signalling impatience with the West's cautious approach by announcing sanctions without waiting for the rest of the EU. The three Baltic states have led calls for the West to take firmer measures against Lukashenko, who is accused by his opponents in the West of rigging an election to prolong his 26-year rule. The sanctions announced simultaneously by the three Baltic countries target officials that they accuse of vote rigging and playing a role in violence against protesters since the August 9th election. Including Lukashenko himself atop the list was a prod to other European countries so far reluctant to back measures against him personally. Again, I think I'll come to you first, Chris, for your reaction to this. Again, we'll need to keep it brief, I'm afraid.
Well, again, here we have the epitome of a right-wing despot, who is getting his wings clipped You know, I'm actually quite happy the fact that these countries have come together, you know, and not waited for the EU
Yeah.
in order to show their displeasure at, you know, what Lukashenko is doing.
Okay, Chris, thank you for your brevity there. Coming to you, Effie, now. It seems to me that the European Union is kind of regarded as being a behemoth that moves too slowly. The UK also seems to be completely absent from this idea of taking sanctions. Effie? Oh.
Beg your pardon.
Oh, sorry, Effie. You're back.
I just got a warning that my battery was going to take me away from
okay.
you, but I switched it back on now. Sorry.
I'll repeat the question, Effie. We're talking about the three Baltic states taking sanctions against Lukashenko, and how the European Union and the UK seem to be painfully slow at making any kind of sanction decision themselves.
Well, you know why the UK would be doing this. They probably do not like the idea of resistance within Belarus. I think some of their ideologies probably align themselves with Lukashenko. But it's what I think. And also, let's not forget the idea of the military cooperation with Belarus. So, in terms of the EU, it's not easy to keep it brief, other than to say this is the time for them to act and act fast and not dwell too long on the, if you like, the institutional minutiae of this, because Belarus is on our doorstep. And there are interesting people in Belarus. There is independent media which is being attacked. There are institutions which are being attacked.
Indeed.
So this is really the time for Brussels to act and do it now.
Okay, Effie, thank you. A very emphatic answer, thank you. Moving on now, and a new benefit is to be created to help with heating costs. The Scottish Government will lay legislation before Parliament to enable the delivery of the new child winter heating assistance later on. This is the first disability benefit to be introduced using the new social security powers. Families with children in receipt of the highest rate of disability living allowance, DLA, the child will receive an extra £200 to help with their heating costs. These payments will be made automatically to eligible families through Social Security Scotland, and this benefit is on track to be delivered this winter. Chris, a good news story for many struggling families, I should think. What do you think?
It is a good news story, but I'll be slightly controversial, Gordon.
Oh, no, not you, Chris.
It shouldn't just be restricted to people on the higher rate of disability allowance. There are many cases of people who are in receipt wrongly, in receipt of middle rate component, who are actually going to lose out on this, and they actually need it. So I'm a bit dismayed that the Scottish Government have used this qualifying sort of like
so it's means tested, basically, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a bit alarmed and a bit sad the fact that they have chosen to do this. As I say, there are many families in the community who only qualify for middle rate component under the UK government's policy. Now, if that policy was dissolved, if it was devolved, then obviously, you know,
it's the old story, isn't it, Chris? If we had the powers to do it, it would be a lot simpler, wouldn't it?
That's exactly what I'm saying to you, Gordon.
Yeah.
If the powers were devolved, we could target all our anger at the Scottish Government. At this moment in time, we can't, because the powers are laid at Westminster for setting out the different rates of DLA.
Okay.
So I'm a bit curious as to why the Scottish Government have went along with the three qualifying criteria for DLA payments.
I've no idea, Chris. Maybe there is a reason. Effie, what's your reaction to this? Briefly, if you would.
Well, Chris's insight and expertise, I am not even going to try and compete. You had loads of technical stuff there that I'm not privy to. So I'll just echo the fact, obviously, that it is great news. Obviously, if it is compromising another benefit, then this really needs to be addressed, because we have the double whammy this winter of COVID and also seasonal flu coming through. So, but the idea that this is specifically for children is a huge bit of news, and obviously I applaud it.
Okay, I think generally speaking, most of us would agree that it should be a bit more wide-ranging, but this is a start, yeah?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to our final story this evening. The Transport Secretary has visited progress on the East Kilbride electrification project. Transport Secretary Michael Matheson visited the ground investigation works for East Kilbride Rail Corridor project. The Cabinet Secretary welcomed this early opportunity to see firsthand the preparatory works taking place to help inform robust costs, options and decision making for this scheme. It forms a key part of the Scottish Government's plans to decarbonise Scotland's rail passenger services by 2035. The Transport Scotland's Rail Services Decarbonisation Action Plan was launched in July with electrification of key routes at its core, which will support a wider transport policy by encouraging a modal shift from road to rail. This particular scheme also builds upon the patronage growth along the East Kilbride line. Effie, let's hear from you first of all. So this is the Transport Minister visiting, I'm assuming, visiting some works in progress and looking at the way they're planning to push ahead with this new project. Again, this is, I guess, a good news story.
It's a great news story, especially when it comes to environmental concerns and enacting climate-friendly policies. As a happy member of the University of Glasgow, I can say, although I'm not in the engineering department, we are pioneers in research into alternative sources of energy. And Scotland has actually opened up new routes into that research. The sad bit of news, I suppose, is that the European Union have traditionally and will continue to fund these researches and these studies, of which, as of the 1st of January, the UK will no longer be party to.
Of course.
So we shall see what happens in the meanwhile. But this is great, and obviously, we are increasingly aware. Obviously, as we've just had a summer of COVID, but still the climate question is hanging over us like a Damocles sword. And this is something that we are dealing with on a daily basis. So, great news, but Brexit.
Okay, thank you, Effie and Chris. Now, we've reached almost the end of the programme, and so it's time for me to start asking you if you would like to help Broadcasting Scotland, and if you would like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland and help us to make more programmes like this and other programmes as well, obviously, then you can do so by following the directions on your screen now, going to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and then follow the prompts after that. That is about it from Broadcasting Scotland and Scotland at 7 this evening. I'd just like to thank my two guests, Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group and our academic Effie Samara. So thank you both very much. And from all three of us here tonight, a very good evening to you.